Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have 5 INTJ YouTubers, and we're here to discuss type, or how it's like to be a YouTuber. And so, Gabriel, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Oh, hello, I'm Gabriel. I'm a YouTuber. I'm not quite sure how to answer the question. I feel like it's a bit broad in scope.
Yeah, it's just tell us about you.
I've been working on a system with me and some people. We're working on a system on how to objectively type people because that isn't an existing thing at the moment. Yeah, we're going to release a book hopefully in a month about how to do it properly and also like the reasoning for why we get to our positions, so it's not just like taking on faith. And yeah,
that's rad. All right, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and he has a YouTube channel called Rational Typology. And Jeff?
Yeah, my name is Jeff. I'm a fairly new YouTuber. I have a channel called INTJ Equation. I kind of look at the dark side of typology, I guess, and look at like personality disorders and mental illnesses. At least that's what I'm trying to get into. I personally have avoidant personality disorder, which is something that affects a lot of INTJs, and I think they don't really have a voice. So I just kind of wanted to give that to people, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very important niche to go into. So people can explore the types of things that also impact type. But yeah, amazing. And so, Michael?
Yeah, Michael, I'm the slacker of the group. I've got a channel with a few videos on it. Haven't done anything on there in a while, but it exists, and I don't know. Maybe this conversation will give me that shot in the arm to go make more.
Rad. Michael, he has cinematic quality videos. It's almost like you're watching a movie, but it's type. And Joe?
Yeah, I'm Joe from Ghost of Jung. I think my channel's half interviews with other type personalities, and then like discussions with my wife, who's an ISTJ. So we kind of talk about relationship dynamics, and I've recently embraced clickbait titles with good content. So that's been fun to do and write those titles.
Yeah. Gotta do that clickbait. That's how you make it big. And AsuraPsych?
Hey everyone, I'm Chris. I run the YouTube channel AsuraPsych. I'm a psychology graduate student. I've been on YouTube doing MBTI stuff for a few years now, so just upload videos whenever I have a thought on something that I'd like to talk about.
Rad stuff. And so, hi, my name is Joyce, and I'm a certified MBTI Master Practitioner, and I facilitate the instrument organizations. I also do typing sessions, and I coach people, and I have a few books coming out, so stay tuned for that. And so the first topic I'd like to talk about with all of you is, what have you learned from being a YouTuber?
Yeah, it's actually pretty difficult, and I think it's more difficult than a lot of people think. I think a lot of people believe you just shoot a video and put it on there, but that's like 5% of it.
I think I've learned about group heuristics more, like how people operate on mass. I think I've learned that more about that. I think I've also learned about the common mistakes people make in their thinking. I think I've learned about that, because you can map out the frequency of commenters and then the frequency of like the mistakes that they make in commenting. That's interesting.
I'd have to say, for me, the best thing about, or the thing that I've gotten the most out of YouTube, is learning how to speak better, which is ironic because I just messed up that sentence. But like if you go look at my videos from like 5 years ago, like my speech is very slow. There's a lot of ums, that sort of thing. But once you've been talking into a camera for 5 years, once a week, 10 to 20 minutes, you learn how to speak. You kind of learn how to develop, in our case, the extroverted thinking, which I think is really good for the introverted types to be able to learn how to better communicate their thoughts to other people.
Yeah. There's some interesting themes mentioned here. For the YouTubers who do interviews of other people, you really get to see a taste of the spectrum of people. And so it really gives you perspective. And it also shows you the common cognitive biases of those people. It gives you like this kind of overview, this bird's eye view of how everyone is seeing type. And AsuraPsych, definitely, it helps you improve your speaking skills too over time.
Yeah, and it's speaking skills. And also, I think there's that experience that anyone has who doesn't have experience with like staring down the barrel of a camera and delivering speech, where there's a kind of I mean, it feels awkward even if you have your technique down. You know, it's just like it's its own kind of experience. It requires its own kind of delivery. So I think you can see that. I always like to see when I find a channel that's interesting to go back and sort by, you know, oldest and see where they started and see how that sort of technique developed. But yeah, if you have that just direct address kind of, it's different in interviews, right? But that direct address kind of style is its own. Yeah, it's its own style for sure.
I feel like I've learned that there's a lot of interest. There's more interest in type than I thought. There's a lot of consistent commenters that really have good input. A lot of different personalities come out in the comment section. There's a lot of people that are very, very comfortable telling you that you're wrong, and then when you say, well, you should make your own channel and do it, there's nothing. That's what I like. It's like, that's a really good point. You should do your own thing. And I'm like, okay, well, there's a lot of critics out there that don't want to do their own thing, but I encourage them to do that because I think anything that brings more people into the type community is a net positive, even if, you know, they come through a 16 personalities like path, it's still good for us.
It is, yeah. You'll have the haters in the comments, which every YouTuber deals with. And it's a sign that your channel is getting big if people are critiquing it. And it's also the fact that it's much harder to be in the rink and doing the thing. It's easier to comment from outside the thing. I feel like as YouTubers, typically like we have a level of respect towards other YouTubers just because we know how hard it is. So almost like when you're in the rink, you know just the difficulty of it. So you're like easier on people who are like making content because we're human and not everything's going to be perfect. Perfect is an illusion. It's more about refinement over time or progress over time.
Joyce, I had a question for the group because I think this would be a funny answer. Is I've always judged like if you've made it on YouTube when they tell you you're not that type. You've gotten so big that now they're starting to tell you you're actually not that type. I haven't got there yet, so that means that I haven't blown up. Has anyone else been accused of not being an INTJ?
Yeah, I get.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mostly get ISFP from the face people. The volatologists, and then from non-volatologists, usually INTP or ENTP. Oh, sometimes ISTP as well.
I've been told I was an ENFP when I was blogging. I started off blogging before I was too afraid to get on camera, but not so far in my videos yet, no.
Yeah, I've gotten ISTP, INFJ, and ENTP, and INFP. So those are I'd say in order of how often they come up, but it just happens. I mean, it happens, especially, it's not even, you know, if you do a lot of these interviews and you bounce around, you'll get some amount of that, or like personality database or something, you know, the democratic approach to type. I know, Chris, you've probably heard your share.
Yeah, I usually either get INTP or, weirdly enough, ISTJ is the one that people seem to think, and I think it's because I like to link my information back to practical outcomes. So I think they're like, oh, that means sensing.
People, I can't believe it. There's a section of the internet that thinks I'm an ESTP. They're probably also like flat earthers too, for whatever I know. It's quite interesting.
I think the ones that are left field are even more fun, because if someone's like, oh, you're an ISFP, I'm like, ah, whatever. Like, yeah, I'm sorry. But if someone comes up and they're like, hey, you might be an ISFJ, I'm like, oh, tell me more. Why might I be an ISFJ?
You gotta serve us some cookies. AsuraPsych, prove your SFJ-ness.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what everyone's favorite part about being a YouTuber is. What keeps you keep YouTubing?
Well, it's hard because, Joyce, as someone who produces a lot of content, you know that like there's just some weeks where you wake up and you're like, oh, I don't want to make a video. You're just like, or at least I'm like that. And I only do one video a week, and I look at people like, even like Frank James, who's doing like 3 fully edited skits a week, and I'm like, how in the world does he have the energy to do all that? But for me, it's nice because it just feels like if I have an idea, I can talk about it. I think that's the reason I started YouTube in the first place, is because like, oh, I have these type ideas and I don't see people talking about them, and I'm just going to put that into a space. And that's still kind of my philosophy. And people are surprised when they hear this, but I don't script any of my videos, like 0 of them. I literally, like, I have an idea and I'm like, that'd be a good video. So I turn on my camera and I talk about it. And to me, that's just kind of, that's how I teach myself, actually, is like verbalizing what I'm thinking and then having it as something that I can reference back to, you know, when I want to think about it again deeper in the future.
Yeah, there's a learning process that comes from teaching too. So yeah, definitely.
I just like it because I guess I could voice my own opinions and my own thoughts. I mean, it's like a double-edged sword, I guess, having everybody doing that, because there's a lot of crazy stuff out there. But I don't know. I guess it's like therapy for me in a way.
That's interesting.
To kind of bounce off that, Jeff, like a lot of YouTubers do this thing, if you've been YouTubing for a while, and I'm guilty of this in the past year too, is they make a second channel. And it's just like, this is the channel where I'm going to upload anything and everything that isn't related to the topic that I'm making videos about. So like, I literally have a second channel where I'm like, I'm going to talk about the business that I started, and I'm going to talk about the motivations of video gamers. And it's just like anything that I have an idea for that isn't for my main channel, I just throw on there, and I don't even care about how it does, because you get burnt out talking about the same thing for years and years on end, even if it's something you care about, because, you know, it's hard being a YouTuber expanding from the niche that you've picked. Like, you start in this niche and you're like, great, I'm enjoying this, I'm growing, but then you kind of hit that wall where it's like, there's not many more people here, so I'm running into the same 4 or 5 people over and over again every single video. There's the same people commenting, and you kind of want to break from that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought about doing that, kind of breaking from your niche. I guess it kind of hurts your channel when you do that.
So you run into this almost exhausting the topics within the niche that you talk about, because it's like, all right, how many times can I spin this off into different things? It's like repackaging a hamburger in different ways. It's difficult.
I think I like the amount of ideas that I'm exposed to on YouTube. I think if you want to prove that you're right, try to find like 20 people that hate you and then tell them what your idea is. Then you'll figure out why it's wrong.
There is definitely a lot of critical thinking and people offering different perspectives, and that can help refine, like, iron sharpens iron, your thought.
Well, how is everybody responding to comments? Because sometimes, I mean, you'll get the long comments that are very well thought out. It's got bullet points and all of this. I'm terrible at you know, getting back to. It'll always be in the back of my head that, okay, well, that's hanging out there, but it's not something that I can say I'm great at addressing. Yeah.
I feel like NI types are obligated to share their view with the world, so we have to keep doing it. If we believe that NI is a rare dominant function, then we need to put out more content because it will be unique. So I almost feel like I want to reframe it as like we're obligated to put out content.
Yeah, it's a disservice to the world almost if you don't use your talents and gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that NI is good at like the long approach, like providing it's being used appropriately. If not, it's just like a conspiracy theory generator. But that can be very useful for people to like kind of understand I guess the ebb and flow of like how society will operate given certain parameters.
I openly encourage people to disagree with me on my channel, but at the same time, like, I don't think that necessarily has to lead to like an argument or a debate. I mean, I'll happily have a conversation with somebody in my comment section who disagrees with me. Just this morning, I talked to somebody, someone said, I disagree with this video that you posted. And I said, great, that's a good thing. I encourage you to disagree with me, because that's how you get to some sort of conclusion that's going to, withstand the test of time. But there is a difference between people who propose their ideas and then people who are trying to attack you. And as a YouTuber, you have to filter out people who are just there to be negative or attack you. And if you can get past that and just learn to take the comments that are constructive criticism, then I think you'll grow much faster. And you'll grow as a person much faster too.
I think I like all the comments actually, including, because this is the way I see it, right? It's either true or it's a different way to be wrong. And knowing either one is useful. Or it's not like a personal attack, but then it's funny. So it's like another victory.
Yeah, you can always find the blessing or the lesson within something.
Yeah, but sometimes and it's the problem with communicating with text always, is that what you might perceive as an attack is actually was meant as something a little more good-natured than it was. I mean, what I would typically do is if there's a comment that seems like it's an attack or seems like it's unfair, especially, is just respond with a question mark. And then half the time they'll write back and write something that sounds much more reasonable and well thought out. And the other half is they'll just come back and start trolling again. So if they come back with something more reasonable, then you can have a conversation. If they come back and it turns out it's just a troll, just keep responding with one question mark to every, and they'll just completely spin out of control. It's a way to drive any troll crazy. The worst thing you can do is get in a conversation with them, but just keep with that one question mark. But a lot of the time it's just, you misinterpret just as you would with any conversation by text, what the tone is,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes people do say things that are a little bit overtly malicious or mean. But when you start talking with them, they take back their tone. So it's almost like if you show them kindness, there are some viewers that realize, oh, I was mean, or it gets them to reconsider what they've been doing towards you. And so they come back with a new attitude. And it's almost like the exact opposite. So I've had this happen where they would be like incredibly hateful, and then I'd talk with them, and then they'd be a little bit almost on the other side. So too nice or too pleasing. And I was like, this 180, very interesting.
It's people will, when they watch a video, they have that kind of visceral gut reaction to it. And that's what makes them type up the comment usually. And it's not even, they usually haven't even like finished the video if something's like that. Cause I've had people who'll be like, I disagree with you because blah, blah, blah. And then they'll edit it and be like, oh, I watched till the end and you said this at the end and that corrected that. And it's like, that's the kind of thing you have to watch out for, is those types of people. But what you said, Joyce, is completely true, because I feel like if you respond to people in a way that's not aggressive, they usually will turn around, or at least have a conversation with you. And I think it's just because they're expecting to kind of, fight everyone that they comment with.
It's like what Joe said at the beginning of the stream. A lot of people, they'll troll you or criticize you, but you shut them down saying, you get in front of a camera and you do it yourself. And I think a lot of that just kind of comes from jealousy in a lot of ways, because they can't get in front of a camera and do it themselves.
Yeah. Critiquing something is easy. It's almost like there's a level of detachment that allows people to say certain things that are like, ooh, that is a new level of harsh. But when you're no longer detached from the scenario and you're actually a part of the process, you learn that, hey, you got to get off your high horse. There's a high horse component, because it's almost like, all right, I do everything right and you do everything wrong. But when you realize that you're in it, it's really difficult, and you become more compassionate when you say things. It's almost like people with their parents, and they're like, I don't like thinking that your parents did a bad job until you became a parent, and you're like, it was harder than I thought. And it's almost revising that expectation and going like, it is difficult. Never mind, I take that back.
I think because with MBTI, you can, it's a very system orientated thing. It's a system of thinking. So you can be very bad at making videos and still be good at critiquing things, because it's the different skill sets.
It is.
But what I often find is that people don't distinguish between the system when they're doing it, which is ridiculous. So it's like they're like, oh, you're not this by this standard. I'm like, but this standard isn't even the standard. It's just it's a completely different system that you and 5 people have come up with. It's really bizarre.
Well, that's what's difficult, because if you're talking about critiquing movies or something, at least you're talking about the same movie.
Yeah.
In this case, when you're going system to system, and then there's always a meta conversation going on about, what approach is preferred by person A versus person B, and then it's just you're not communicating at all in those cases.
Yeah,
that's a good point. Gabriel brings up the point of there are different systems within typology, but there are some people who see them as completely separate, and there are other people who group them together and mix them in a makes them up. And so you're going to have commenters who are not even talking about the same thing, that the fundamental assumptions there are completely different, yet it's being talked about as if they're the same thing, which can cause confusion too.
It's incredibly bizarre to me that people would do that at all. It's like people get like contradictive models and just kind of smush them together and then see what happens. It's like, well, you're going to get contradictive systems, of course. Like they're different for a reason.
Yeah. Gabriel's very passionate about that. And so I'm wondering, what is everyone's struggles with YouTube? Like the different theories thing is one of them. What are the other things that are a bit of a struggle or a challenge as a YouTuber?
I think for me, it's building a community because, I'm a very unhealthy INTJ and I'm trying to, integrate myself, become more healthy, but it's hard to build a community when I don't really have a sense of community, I guess.
Is it because sometimes I think is it just too niche? I actually just subscribed to your channel. I didn't know about it, but is it because it's too niche and just like it's only geared towards like the 0.5% INTJs or something, or what?
I think it's just a little overwhelming for me personally to constantly have to like talk and integrate with people. I think that gets a little stressful for me personally. I don't know about how it feels for you guys, kind of being just deeply introverted. I don't know how introverted you guys are compared to me, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, community building is quite interesting, quite the challenge too. What part of community building is the hardest? Is it like staying in contact with your audience? Is it knowing where to reach your audience? Where is it?
Yeah, I think there's just so many options of doing it, so many different various forms of social media, Discord, Reddit, and all that stuff. And it's just kind of hard for me to kind of pinpoint which one to use. And I guess trying too many at once is kind of a challenge for me personally.
Yeah, and then it becomes about energy management. It's like, where do I put my energy?
Yeah, because I have to, I work a day job still. I have to use that energy there and I have to use that energy with people online. And I'm a dad, I have a son, so that and only X amount of energy to go around, I guess, for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does everybody use? I mean, I think Discord is quite popular, seems quite popular. Joyce and I know Chris, right? You have different communities. I don't know.
Yeah, I use Discord. I mean, it's open, and I've had it open for like 2 years now, but I don't really advertise it. And what that's led to is I have a really tight-knit community of like 20 to 30 regulars who are extreme supporters of my content. And that's something that I've built up over 2 years. And it's people that I interact with daily. All I have to do is go into my server and be like, hey guys, what's up? Say hi to these same few people every single day. And you build up this community of people who, support you in your content. And that's nice, I think.
Yeah. Are they mostly INTJs? What type groups are loyal supporters? Is there a typical relation?
INTJs and INFJs, and then INTPs sometimes. The INTPs tend to be trolly on Discord, I find. So they can get into trouble sometimes if they're not careful. But definitely there is a bias towards INTJs because people who get sessions with me are far more likely to join my Discord server. And then, INTJs are more likely to want to get sessions with me because they see my content.
Yeah, yeah. And you have good content, Chris. And so I'm wondering, how many of you are part-time or full-time YouTubers?
Part?
Very part.
Yeah, part-time.
Yeah.
Full-time.
I'm full-time.
I did want to bounce off the last question before we skip to it about the difficulty part. Because,
Yes.
Joe, this is something that you talked about earlier. And for me, I would say right now, my biggest struggle, and it's actually been the struggle for a few years now, is being able to clearly see what will work and not wanting to do it. So like the clickbait titles, the skits, these are like, it's like, I know 100% if I did these, my channel would skyrocket. But it's like, it feels so inauthentic to want to do that type of stuff. And it's not that I feel bad towards the people who do that, because to them, that is authentic. That is their way of being authentic. But to me, it's completely against how I want to present my channel, my ideas, myself. And there's this struggle between knowing that I could do that and grow much faster and then not wanting to do that.
It's really interesting that you're saying that from my perspective, because I'm looking at through the perspective of like subtype. Your subtype is in the business we're working on is more orientated towards efforts. So it's interesting that you're like expressing that in
And Enneagram, I also test as a 5.4, so I know that could be in the same realm.
Yeah. Joe, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I actually hired an ENFP coach when I first started doing type and business, making a business around that, and she was like, "You need to make these titles." And like Chris said, the authenticity part, the stubbornness, like, no, I will not present myself. I won't do clickbait. Anyone that does clickbait has bad content. And then I started to do it, and I realized you can do clickbait titles as long as your information is really good and authentic, and you actually are that person behind the screen. So like, you know, I always do stuff that's the opposite of what I'm talking about. It's like why the INTJ is the worst spouse, but then my wife and I talk about why we can be good spouses, and then why the ISTJ is the most boring type. You know, that's a stereotype, but we talk about why ISTJs are interesting. So as long as you deliver on the content, you could have the most clickbait, like garbage title ever. It just took me a while to realize that.
Yeah, you can do the bait and switch. The title can be catchy, but then you have good content in it. It's like, caught you. Now you're here. Listen to this.
But no one ever complains why, like, oh, I've been misled. I'm unsubscribing. No one ever says that.
Well, that's the quality piece. I mean, the thing about your channel, Joe, is the titles are so aggressively clickbaity that it's like there's humor behind that, you know. So I think it's when there are some things that I just can't tolerate. Like one of the things, because there's a lot out there about how to sort of game the algorithm and what the advice is for YouTubers, and it's pretty consistent advice. One problem with that is everything sort of becomes more and more formulaic because everyone's following the same advice, and that's not good. The other thing is some of this advice is just bad. So there's things that you'll see that there was a point, I don't know if it was a few months ago there was a certain point where everybody started putting like one or two words in capital letters in their titles, like, which I assume has something to do with, you know, someone's browsing a page and those will pop out to them. That just seems silly. And I hate these capital letters screaming at me. There's things like that. There are all of the conversations about quantity over quality, which is in all of the advice I've seen, it all veers toward quantity over quality. Obviously, quantity is important to some extent, but if it's quantity over quality, then, you know, you're not gonna, don't put something out there just for the sake of quantity if the quality isn't there, you know. But I'm with Chris. I think, yeah, there's things that it's the sort of not being able to force yourself to do it kind of thing, even if it isn't good advice, and you know it would work to some extent. The only important thing is just not just doing formula, because then your stuff is like everyone else's, and you're probably not going to grow your channel that way anyway. You can have your own formula, you know, your own consistent kind of way that you put things together, but it's the when it comes to the advice, you can tell that a lot of people are following the same advice of how to use Premiere, how to do this or that. It's like, find your own sort of approach to these things, you know?
Yeah. It's nicer to have a small channel too, because you don't have to deal with as many crazies. And so almost having your own niche community is nice, because you don't have many Karens, because there's not a lot of new people entering. So sometimes it's nice to not follow formula, because you can have your own community and it's not filled with the generic community within the typology sphere.
There's this weird point if you're a YouTuber, and this is like not bashing on any smaller channels, but once you kind of hit like the 1,000 mark and then all the way up to the 100,000 mark, you're in this weird middle ground of like, you have a community, but it's not so large that you don't see the same names all the time. Because once you hit like 100K, there's so many comments that like you're never going to see the same two people. And it's just like, you know, Frank James, there's no way he's reading every single comment on his videos. But at our YouTube channel size, you see everybody. And there's also quite a few people commenting, and you kind of have to deal with that fact of like these reoccurring people in your channel.
They're like friends.
Yeah. And well, but also there's going to be enemies within that. So you have to learn how to manage.
speaking of authenticity, so when I just hit like 1,000 a month ago, and I was like, oh great, I can run ads now, and then I was like, oh like I don't want non-skippable video ads because those are the worst. So that's also like a compromise that people are like, well, you make more money if you just put every single monetization option available. So that was another thing where I was like, I'll just do like the little display ones and the banner ones, but I don't want any of that non-skippable stuff. Anyone have that problem where they were just like, what do I do now?
Well, isn't YouTube, was there a point where they started putting ads on unmonetized videos as well? That was a story about, I want to say about a year ago, that they were going to start doing that. It was very sort of cryptic language in one of their terms updates, but I don't know if you have much control over it anymore as it stands, but I don't know if anyone has more detail on that. It's inevitable if it's not happening now.
It used to be like that, Joe, but then like as a YouTuber, especially of our size, you make so little money off YouTube ad revenue. It's like nothing. So I don't really feel bad putting the long ad. If somebody wants to watch my content and support it, that's good too. But like I'm literally making scraps from YouTube ad revenue. It is nothing.
Yeah. I recently reached 1 million views, and I check the ad revenue that I get from it, and it's like, you made $1,000, and it's like
total. Yeah, and it's like, oh great.
That's not a lot at all. And so long comments versus short comments, this came up. So do you typically respond to the longer comments or the shorter comments? Do you respond to comments? Do you typically go on Discord to respond? How active are you in community engagement and talking with people?
My channel's really small, but if someone does comment or talk to me, I usually talk to them, and I guess that's good about being so small. You can talk to people a lot more, but if someone leaves a comment on YouTube that's just like a complete insult, I'll usually just ignore it. I mean, I understand constructive criticism and just criticism, but why fuel the fire for trolls, I guess. But I do appreciate the longer comments if there's something real well thought out and they have reasons and stuff, and pick me apart. I'm welcome to that.
How comfortable are you all with being picked apart?
Comfortable.
I wish people would put more effort into it. I feel it's like people learn this thing, and it's like their thing, and they try to orientate themselves via that thing. But it doesn't make sense in a lot of different contexts. So I wish people would have a broader scope of how to be wrong, so they could probably critique people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this community relative to others is pretty nice compared to, I mean, there are certain channels that are magnets for more of the negativity, and certain channels that put more of the negativity out there. And there are also things will pop up here and there, but compared to other communities, I mean, it's not difficult to sort of ignore something that, I mean, listen, if there's a fair criticism, then fine. It's like, great. If something's unfair, it's okay. But delete the comment. You're the prince of the channel. Get out. What is this? This all of this social media. This democracy. No, this is your space. Do what you will. Yeah. Do what you will. If you need to draw that line in the sand, then draw it. But at the same time, I found most of the folks have been pretty kind. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the threads on Joyce's videos, right? Joyce, and your something will pop up here and there, but it's not compared to the internet, it's not so bad, right?
Most people are really nice on my channel, but I wonder if it's because I'm just super gentle and people don't want to hurt the
atmosphere.
Exactly.
Usually it's the community from someone else's channel that will come to your channel, or on their video. They if a video is made about you, Joyce, they will comment about you on that, and they might pop over to your video and also mention it or something.
Yeah, those can be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The great thing about being a YouTuber is that you gain a little bit of a thick skin. After a while, you get the same hate comments over and over again, so you expect them. You're like, Well, no one says anything new in terms of hate. So after a while, you become desensitized to it, or you kind of laugh it off because you're not being hit with new bullets. It's the same bullets, and it's quite funny how they're unoriginal too. So,
All right. I just try not to give too much time or attention to people who aren't going to put time or attention into the comments that they leave. You know, if they leave a well thought comment where they're criticizing me, I'm happy to respond to it. But at the same time, you asked about community engagement, how often. Once a day, I try to hop on the YouTube Studio app and at least respond to 1 or 2 comments and just be like, hey, thanks for watching. Because I feel like that's something that really helps, especially if it's someone that you recognize their name, and you're like, oh, I've seen you supporting my channel for a few months now. Thanks. I really appreciate that. But then I live on Discord, so I'm on Discord like 24/7. So they see me there all the time.
yeah, that's nice. It's your home, your digital home. I typically respond to a few YouTube comments. If they're typically regular, is more likely. But yeah, the community is nice. So Jeff, what are your thoughts? I'm probably putting you on the spot and it's making things even more.
Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I just mostly talk to, like I said, my stuff's real small still, so I mostly engage on Discord, but I do try to fish Reddit and try to find people, and that's always an interesting experience. There's a lot of mixed bags there, I guess. A lot of mistypes and a lot of people who have the 16p mean terminology, and it's the extent of their knowledge of type, and they're very opinionated, I guess.
I think that's a really important point, because another thing that this is something that weirds me out about all of this is that you don't know who you're talking to. So I mean, I don't want to launch into an argument with someone who's 14. You know what I mean? Like I have no idea who I'm talking to. And if I looking at some of these interactions, if you just imagine them happening in physical space between, people who are present in those situations, it's like I've got one image in my mind of what that is, but it might be someone who's, 55 screaming at a 13-year-old at the same time, So that's why I veer to the side of, just not engaging more online in general, just because of those kinds of dynamics, it's just I don't know who I'm talking to,
There's a lot of people with type dysphoria. That's what I kind of like to call it. I don't know, one day they're this type, the next day they're this type, and they're usually that 14 to like 23, 24 age range, I guess, where you're just kind of figuring yourself out. And so that's always a struggle, I think, too.
The type communities are so different. Like you have like the Reddit community is like kind of that age group. And then you have the Instagram, which is probably the most like artistic, and they have some really, really fun channels that are just totally light. There's no criticism, like MBTI's things comes to mind. And there's some really good stuff there. Then like I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. So there's like more professional kind of content, more oriented towards the workplace. I try to do Twitter. I think it's just like, that's the bottom for me. Like that's the worst. Joyce, I know you're on there, and that's how I actually communicate with you, but some of the stuff on Twitter is real bad. I don't know why it's on Twitter, but it seems to be just like, if you want the worst of type, Twitter, there you go.
Interesting. And Joe, you mentioned workplace stuff too. And so that brings us to the APTI winter conference that Joe and we had a part of the committee ask if we could help bring awareness to their conference. That brings us back to the LinkedIn niche, where Joe, you bring type to these workplaces or in a workplace format, and it attracts a lot of opportunities like the APTI one.
That's like the more formal PhD level type, where it's like type practitioners that have literally got trained by like David Kiersey and Isabel Myers, like they're in their 70s and 80s, still doing type. So they're more in that corporate, they all have Fortune 100 clients, and they kind of write for themselves. That's why, like, I think you, Joyce, and then Megan Lavoda, and some of the, I guess, called like new guard of type are starting to do presentations at these conferences to bridge that gap, because it's like just everything is siloed, I think, in the type community, and us coming into like the more formal type is better, I think, for us. And just to see like what these people are on social media, but they have so much information to provide to us but they only do it in formal settings where we're not involved. The youth are not there at all.
Absolutely. There's this big gap between the older generation of type and the younger generation of type, as Joe mentioned. So the older generation is typically the Association of Psychological Type and people on LinkedIn who have been doing this for forever. And typically the APTI is more centered on the 8-function model approach from John Beebe. So if you're interested in that, I would recommend going to the older communities too if you want to learn. Like, they go into it in way more depth. And so there are a lot of new guards like me, Megan, and Joe who will give presentations at the Association of Psychological Type in an effort to bridge the gap between these two communities. And
I love how Gabriel can't contain his laughter because he doesn't believe there's 8 functions. Well, he does, but he doesn't believe that everyone has access to them all.
Hey, I'm a 4-function model guy too. So.
I know, but I don't think you don't believe that there are 8, but I thought you only taught the 4. It's interesting.
It's weird.
I was laughing at John Beebe. That might be rude. I'm recently looking at his model, and I was hysterical because it was so bad. But maybe there's some stuff he's got that I don't know about that's good.
I personally subscribe to the 8-function model, especially John Beebe. The bottom 4, not necessarily that really come out a lot. I think they're just they go against your ego, and you have to. That's what Jung said. You have to learn to integrate your shadow into your ego to become complete and kind of get away from the one-sidedness. That's the way I see it. It's kind of like a roadmap to basically being healthy and complete and individualization.
But well, I mean, it's always a question again of how you bridge the gap between the two, because if you're considering a certain amount of, I mean, it depends on how you define 4-function versus 8-function models. But if you're considering a certain amount of material and figuring out how are these distributed through the functions, much different approach to interpreting that material if you're fitting them through 4 functions than if you're fitting them through 8. I mean, you're looking at everything in an entirely different way. Where I draw the line is when especially when it comes to the 8-function models, where it's the lines are too clean and too precise and they're too sort of archetypal, I guess. And I think that's Beebe's approach. It's the very Jungian or Joseph Campbell style of, distributing the 8 functions archetypally, which is just too it's just too neat, I think. So that's why I don't lean in that direction. Although I would say that I prefer an 8-function model, just in the sense of I lean toward introverted functions being modes of subjectivity, extroverted functions being modes of objectivity. So if you're engaging with the sensory world, there's a subjective and an objective. There's 2 sides to that coin, and you're going to be engaging with both. But questions of development and questions of how present functions are, like if you didn't have introverted or extroverted feeling the way that I look at type, if you didn't have either of those, you would be insane. To not have a sort of subjective kind of, to not have felt judgments subjectively, and to not engage at all with, the more free floating sort of objective situation as far as feeling is concerned, is just my approach to interpreting type. So I don't think the others are invalid. I just think it's a very, very different way of interpreting the same materials. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting when people talk about 8-function models, they might not even be talking about the same thing. So Socionics 8-function model is so different than John Beebe's 8-function model. They are not the same animal. And I find that if you do use an 8-function model, you have to actually be really, 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 really well trained in it, or else you run the risk of justifying mistypes with it, because you can justify literally anything within the 8 functions. So you're not supposed to use it in typing people, but you can use it after the fact.
I'd say one of the largest problems I've noticed with the 8 function models is it's not clear what they're trying to measure. So a good example actually is NI, and it's often described as just knowing things, but you've got no way of knowing how to measure if someone is just knowing things. And it's probably impossible because of other underlying fundamental principles about how reality operates. So we don't actually know what we're measuring. So we could be measuring anything. So it's not objective.
Yeah, and I think the operative word there is measurement, right? Because not even not everybody is measuring things in some way. I mean, if it's a question of measurement, more objective criteria, more what we call scientific criteria, that's one way of approaching this. Another way would be more interpretive, right? Which is less. I mean, that's my issue with the 8 function model, is if it's a hierarchical model that's, where there's a sort of schematic approach that's very precise. It's not. It's just, again, it's too neat. But I personally, I don't mind the messiness, and I think the goal of, and I'm not saying, Gabriel, this is what you're saying, but the goal of some to have a more, let's say scientifically, a more acceptable, in a scientific sense, kind of approach to measurement, even leaning into like brain science and very sort of physical kind of approach. Those are things that are just they're not interesting to me. I mean, I think on their own terms they can hold together. It's just not for me.
That's what I've been, me, and it's not just me, it's other people, but that's what we've been working on, like making it so you can objectively know what you're measuring. It's also my main problem with BB's work is that he conflates ethical and function criteria. They're not, like, if they're ethical criteria, then it's a philosophy of how you should behave in the world, entirely different from how you should be processing information. Like, they're entirely different fields of I'm not even sure what the right word is. Like, one is philosophy and one is like objectively measuring things, and they're different kinds of things. So to conflate them seems like it's very silly, because then they shouldn't. It's like I can make a model of how to go down the street. It's not easy to derive ethics from me doing that. They're different kinds of operations.
Interesting. All right, so we can move on to another topic too. What is something that you've learned about INTJs through this whole YouTube journey? Maybe either in yourself or INTJs that you've talked to that was revolutionary to you?
I've got one.
Okay, cool.
I've learned that INTJs often have a competency bias. INTJs are more likely to believe the claims of other people without checking them, as opposed to other people. So let's say INTJ flaw.
I would actually kind of agree with Gabriel in some sense there, because I'm very quick. Like, if I need to learn something, like, I'll kind of look for the authority to it and then apply that. But I'm also very quick to change that, because for me, TE, being that secondary function, I'm not holding it as any part of my identity. So I'm very quick to trust things as being right from some sort of authority. But as soon as I detect a flaw, I'll throw it out and go to the next best source, or the next thing that I think can fulfill that need. But that has got me into trouble before, because I don't want to do like the TI thinking for myself. I want to find someone else who's done all the thinking, use their work and get some sort of outcome from it.
I find that talking to other INTJs is they usually have kind of a rough upbringing, or they have a kind of a hard start to life, and kind of I think mostly in general, the ones that I spoke to, maybe that's just who gravitate and talk to me, but they kind of, I don't know, just had a rough childhood, and they're really misunderstood, and they really don't understand themselves in a lot of ways. I think there's this big misconception that we are all these super self-confident people and we're really self-sufficient, but I think a lot of us growing up were just the complete opposite of that, really.
Yeah. A lot of people who are drawn to the type community are people who have had rough lives. A lot of people are sometimes they had an ontological shock and they're trying to make sense of their life again. And so they're looking for an organizing framework to help make sense of their suffering. So there's quite the community here.
I don't know what ontological means. Can you inform me?
Yeah, ontological shock is when the basic premises of the framework of how you make sense of the world and reality in life are broken down, whether it be perhaps a divorce where you had to completely break down your idea of you were going to spend your whole life with this person and now it's totally not. And then what do you base your life on? Or you lost this career or you quit your job and you no longer want to do what you want to do and you're trying to restart your entire life and you have to break down that framework of what a happy life means. Or maybe someone dies close to you. Basically, death can also cause an ontological shock too, because now you have to question the basic premise of what it means to be alive, your existence, and where meaning and purpose is found. And so people try to find that in type.
I'd like to ask a question to the INTJ here. Which, like, because I've been doing that since I was, for as long as I can remember thinking. I've been questioning my fundamental presuppositions about, like, I didn't know what the words were at the time. That's what I was doing. About how I thought things worked. And I'm wondering if that is an INTJ thing in itself. I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say about it.
I would agree with that in some sense. I think there is a sense of maturity that comes with it because, growing up, you start to question your own motives and other people's motives in terms of like their frames of thinking. And when you're young, you have the assumption that you're right more often than not. And you have to kind of learn to beat down that bias as you get older. But it was definitely something that I agreed with. And even just like the questioning of, your existence, the meaning of things associated with them is something that I remember starting very young, like 5 or 6. I remember sitting in the car, backseat, grandparents driving down the road, and I'm in my mind trying to zoom out, like, okay, so what is exist? Like, what's the greatest concept that I can think of? And I'm zooming out, and it's like the highest order concept that I can process in my mind is existence, because I don't think anything what does it mean to not exist? And those are types of thoughts that I remember having very young, and that zooming out, I think, is probably common for many INTJs.
I relate a lot to that too, like a lot. And I dom things.
Yeah, I think of like the, if you had if your approach to reality was was more grounded in like extroverted sensation, then, a situation changes and you accept, like you deal with the facts of the situation that have now changed. I think what happens as you get older, as things collide with your worldview and the way that you are, the way that we, as especially NI DOMs, are sort of engaging with the world. I mean, we have this sort of thematic threads that run through everything. And if something were to cut one of those, then it throws the rest of that, everything else that falls into that thread, into chaos. And it's unavoidable that, if you're out there engaging with others, engaging with the world, that there's going to be a lot that, comes around to challenge your way of perceiving things. So I think we need to be flexible and just sort of, not because what one impulse could be to fight against whatever's coming in to sort of throw everything, to upend everything. And the other is to sort of step back. I think it might be, why we tend to withdraw a lot and to just sort of let things sort of need to settle in the background. There's nothing that we can do to force them back into alignment because they need to fall into a new alignment.
Joe?
I'm just in agreement. It was beautifully put. And I also forgot the question.
The question was INTJ things you've learned being a YouTuber, or just INTJ things, period?
I don't know if there's anything like particular to the INTJ that I was like, I noticed that the community I felt was much more articulate than I felt I was. I was like, man, these guys can speak really well. And like, now that I know that Chris doesn't script anything, it's like, well, wow, I have a lot of work to do on my TE to get that going. But I do agree with Jeff. That's like, I don't think we're all that confident, at least in your youth. I think now I'm more confident, but there's definitely that like a low self-esteem I felt till I was like 28. I'm like 32 now. So like it took a while to get that confidence that the other types just are born with that swag when they do everything. And that took a while to craft almost.
That's a point of insecurity. When I interview people, like everyone is so confident. Anyways, AsuraPsych, you unmuted, so you had something to say.
I just want to say, Joe, my secret is that I treat every video as like a format. So like, it's like if you watch my videos, they're all like an academic paper. It's like intro, descriptions, main points, conclusion. And like once you have that process for making a video, you don't have to think too much about scripting it because you already know like what you're going to do.
It's like that might be why the ISTJ label could get thrown on you.
Yeah.
Any other INTJ isms, quirks?
I think for me, it's like when Chris was talking about when he was young, like 4 to 6, and you're just kind of having these big existential questions that people are just kind of like, what the hell are you talking about? Oddly enough, my ESTP grandpa kind of favored them, I guess. He like would talk to me about it, and he would just be interested in just like everyone else, kind of like, what's wrong with you? But he was kind of like, he just saw something different. It was really interesting. I don't know.
It's also kind of weird, like when you have those thoughts young, because I'm having an SI moment. I was like 10 years old at Disney World one time with my grandfather, who's an ISTJ, and the rest of my family was on a ride, and I was trying to talk with my grandfather about aliens and the idea that there might be life out in the universe, and he was just like, I don't like, what are we talking about? And I'm like a 10-year-old talking to the 60-year-old man, and he's like, what are you even going on about? And it's those kind of things that I remember sticking out being young, is trying to have those types of conversations. And you don't find that they're always reciprocated, which I think is what causes many INTJs to kind of shelter themselves away, even more so when they try to have these conversations that they find interesting, but other people don't seem to be as interested in them.
Yeah, the one-sided conversation. My next question for everyone is, what is your experience of introverted intuition? So we all know what it is because we've been in this for a long time. But what I'm particularly interested in with you all is how it manifests itself in you, because it might have some aha moment there that would be interesting.
Yeah, for me, it's I have this real deep inner dialogue within myself, like a voice that I probably sound schizophrenic here, but I have a voice that that communicates with me and kind of guides me to the right direction. And yeah, I do have these like flashes, and I can see the patterns, and I kind of click things together, and I do have these aha moments, which are really common in what Chris said during I did interviewed him a few weeks ago or whenever it was, and he said, like, if you have these aha moments and you're surprised by them, you're probably not an NI Dom. I think just for us, it's just kind of like an everyday thing. But going back to the kind of the last question too, I know like it's kind of frustrating and lonely being an NI Dom, NI hero, whatever you want to call it. And even like other NI heroes, NI Doms don't kind of see the things that you see, and that can be kind of frustrating too. So you're just kind of in it alone. You have your own perceptions, I guess, for me.
I think that's why NI Doms like NE Doms so much. Because it's like, if you spark up a conversation about an NI insight you have, they'll just bounce off of it forever. And you can just have an interesting conversation. And it's like, wow, that's kind of neat. Because two NI Doms aren't always going to have the same perception. It's a great point. And like, even being married to an ENFJ myself, that's something I notice. Or if I have an interesting thought, but it's not something that she came to a conclusion on herself, we can't really have a conversation about it. She hasn't processed NI in that way. But if she has come to that conclusion, or if she can see it clearly right off the bat, then there can be an interesting discussion. Whereas with an NE type, it's like, here's an idea, and they're like, ooh, fun. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, Gabe and I, if you ever seen our interviews, I never know what he's saying every time. I'm always like, oh, so you mean that, Gabe? And he's like, no, I mean this. I'm like, okay, perfect. Okay, I get what you're saying now. This? No. So that's just funny how like there's not really a standard of like, well, both NI, so easy communication. I would say absolutely not.
Yeah, like the introverted functions are for yourself and the extroverted functions are for the collective. And so typically NI, because it's made for yourself, it's harder, like if the other person doesn't have it in their mind, it can be harder to communicate for them to fully grasp it. And 2 NI users, like everyone was saying, could have different NI.
From my like internal perspective, so it's very like, I guess it's my observations. It's like there's kind of a bunch of like roots, and then they branch out into different patterns, and like the more like fundamental ones don't break because they can't, but then the branches do. It's kind of like, it's like you try to break them to get to stronger branches to then build out your awareness of how things operate. Yeah, that's what it's like an analogy of that's what it feels like, I guess. Yeah,
and then you have the ENTP saying, we don't like roots. They're like, roots. And then it's an interesting contrast. Quite hilarious. But yeah, Michael.
Introverted intuition, always difficult to describe, but I think I see it. I see it as schemes or themes that are always suspended, and then there's more suspended in the background, and just any sort of, there's always a recontextualizing going on in the background, so that when if you want to look at it empirically, it's like information comes in and it sort of organizes itself along these various threads that aren't based on specific concrete experience, but they're organized around themes. And then depending on what we need from them, an action's going to cut through any number of those themes and sort of project out typically something like an outcome, so that the mode of perception is sort of, there's all of these things in front of me, but I need to do X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z somehow comes through this matrix of different schematics and thematic threads, and projects an outcome. I mean, it's just sort of what it looks like in reality is just sort of laying down sometimes and not trying to force it, and just letting things settle. But as always, incredibly difficult to describe. Not a magical thing. And yeah, with the aha moments, I think it was, I don't know, I don't remember if it was Chris or Jeff who mentioned that it's like, it's not a surprise. It's just how, it's just, yes, suddenly the answer is there, but sometimes you need the answer and it's not there yet. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's not there yet. And there's no way to force that except sometimes finding your closest extroverted intuitive friend and really bouncing it around, to come to a conclusion. But it's sort of, it feels distant. It feels like it's operating independently, but it's something that I trust. It's just keeping things in order, no matter how much sort of chaos is going on out here.
I like what you said, Michael, about not being able to force it, because the weakness, I think the primary weakness that NI has is it's like, imagine trying to solve a math problem without understanding how to solve that kind of math. Like that's the weakness of NI, is NI doesn't have a formula. It just tries to find the solution. So if you're presented with something that requires some sort of formula to solve, you're going to struggle a lot more than probably a type who has introverted thinking high, for example. And I find myself getting very frustrated if I have to solve something complex or deeply logical and I can't do it quickly because I'm not just getting the answer. And that can be quite annoying.
Yeah. And Michael, you also mentioned settling. And so there is an element where it's almost like if NI were a koi pond, a body of water, it's almost like there are ripples in the water and you're waiting for the ripples to settle. And so you can see the image clearly.
Yeah, and I also like what Chris, you were saying about it's sort of you sort of drew that line nicely, I think, between perception and judgment, because if you're solving a problem, you're engaged in thinking, right? But you have to perceive the problem. You have to perception has to cut through all of this to sort of see a path that you're going through. So you can really force the thinking, and I think that's why the extroverted thinking can be when it gets very forceful and very aggressive, at least for me, it's when I can't see that path and I need to like force something to a conclusion and I don't have like a clear line of sight. So
I think that's really where we get the archetype of like the hero and the villain in fiction, where it's just like, I'm just going to do it. Like, you can't stop me. Try. Like, it's just, they see the outcome, they see the perception, but they don't have the logic or tools needed to get there directly. So they force it into reality.
Has everyone had a chance to answer the question?
Joyce, I just want to bounce off because you used the pond analogy, and that's an analogy I like too. I talked about it in a previous stream, where I see NI as kind of like a still body of water waiting for stones to be thrown in it, and then the water shapes around those stones. But the issue is that when you compare that to extroverted intuition is more like a river or a body of water that's moving, and NI can't move to the thing that it wants to perceive. It has to receive the insight. The stone has to be thrown into the lake. And I think that's another, it goes back to the idea of like not being able to actively like use NI to solve problems. It's more like you're waiting for the answer to be kind of just smack you in the face.
I feel like I will force myself to reach conclusions quite frequently. But like maybe it's just like my like different aspects of my personality, because I've always had this kind of like almost obsessive tendencies to get to specific answers. So it's like if I'm focused on a goal, then like usually to figure something out, and it's like there won't really be significant priorities other than that. So it's like I can so I'll like force my consciousness into a mechanism for processing that kind of data.
It's a good point, Gabe. And I think even like TE plays a little bit into that, because if, as like NI Dom types, if we can't internally process it ourselves, we're very likely to seek something that can help us find the solution or build, some sort of frame of reference with external logic of some kind. I find that it's just annoying if I have to sit there and do it myself. Like if I don't have a lot of resources to ping off of, like I don't want to just stare at a problem and be like, okay, what's the answer to this? Like that's interesting if I'm trying to like conceptually solve a problem or like develop a model or theory about something. But if I'm trying to like solve something that has a concrete or distinct answer, it gets boring really quickly.
Cool. And so that brings us to extroverted thinking. How do you all experience TE?
For me, I think it was something that I don't like to use as much as at least when I was younger, but now I do enjoy it. Like I read quite a bit now, like mostly nonfiction. I don't know, but like I know it's about organization and stuff, but I don't know about other people, but like my shelves and stuff was like cluttered, but like I don't know, thoughts really organized in my mind. And like kind of like Chris said, I really don't want to sit there and think about it like my own, like really think it out like a TI user would. That kind of frustrates me, and I think that's kind of like TI in a shadow, really, where I don't know. But yeah, it's just kind of like collecting ideas and kind of feeding your NI. I think you need to really feed your NI and give it information where you can kind of come to these conclusions on its own.
I think it's the only thing that makes NI worth a damn is TE, because like NI by itself is just like, it's nothing. It doesn't do anything. It just observes. And then TE is the thing that like makes it happen. So when you don't know what the terms are called, I don't even know if you could distinguish yourself from another person. But then when you understand that, you're like, oh, I had this thought and now I can see how we can effectively go forward. That was like probably the biggest revelation for me now that we're talking about it, is like, oh, that I can capture the insight and then do it. That's the only thing that makes it effective. It's interesting like to think about what FE would do to help NI, how different that is, but different conversation.
Yeah. If you're stuck in your introverted functions, you're just in a vacuum all the time. So it's good to like put it out there. Absolutely.
And TE, it kind of helps articulate your NI too. Like if you have like this NI thought and you try to extrovert and express it out, it's really hard. But if you kind of have a way like you kind of see how it's phrased and you kind of get the idea how to phrase it outside, I think it makes it a lot easier than just kind of, I guess, being in your NI and your FI where you just kind of feel something's true and you try to explain it and people are like, what the hell? You don't have no bias on that. What are you saying?
Yeah, and I think extroverted thinking also it restructures things into a timeline. I feel like because introverted intuition, it feels more timeless, more thematic. There's not a timeline running through it, but extroverted thinking is sort of, it's working things through to an outcome. So it's a way of sort of organizing things back into time toward a specific goal, and then that contextualizes everything. You know, it's not like introverted thinking, which is just this sort of, it's very all of the sort of any subjective judgment about true, false, you know, whatever the case, all of that is contextual to the outcome I'm now pursuing. If I'm really engaged in thinking, that comes first, you know, and then it's just when it, you know, bringing perception into it, it's just organizing those things again onto a timeline that sort of accords with that goal or with that outcome. Because without that, like just without that, I have a hard time thinking through much of anything if I don't have an outcome that I'm moving toward.
So I'm not like a huge Socionics fan, but I am kind of a fan of the Quadra work they do, because I think some very good stuff has been written on Quadras in the Socionics communities. And one of the things that I like when I see them talk about it, in like the Gamma Quadra specifically, is the unique pairing that TE has with Extroverted Sensing, as both of them being valued functions, and the INTJs and the SFPs. And that it's very hard for me to personally feel like I can't do something, because like TE plus SE equals, I can make it work in reality by like forcing it to work in reality. And I think that that's the unique pairing that happens with NI, because it's like you have a perception of an outcome you'd like, and all of a sudden TE and SE are like, great, we can force it into reality. We can, like, I've got the logic in the real world and I've got the action in the real world, and both of these together will allow me to bring this outcome that I want. Whereas if I look at like STJs, for example, there tends to be more like actual planning when it comes to their goals, because they're like, all right, how do I have to I need to internalize this and make sure that it's going to be something that I can follow through with over time consistently. Whereas with me, it's like, I don't need to have like a strict plan, because as Michael said, I have a timeline. I have like a rough estimate of the things that I need to do. And I feel like I can bring that into reality through forcing it almost.
Absolutely. And I think grouping the types by functions should be something brought into MBTI too. So actually, Linda Behrens, she's creating something called intentional styles. What that basically is grouping the types by functions. She would call the NTJs and the SFPs orchestrating. So with the SETE, that has that ability to force in the moment and make what you want to work. Given also the FI and the NI motivating that too. And so function groupings should totally be taken into MBTI in some way. And I'm also writing about it in the book that I'm writing. So one of the things that I'm doing is I'm creating my own way of seeing type 2, and I'm turning it into a book. It would be cool to bring grouping by functions into MBTI in a way that's very MBTI, because then you don't have socionics people arguing. It's only a socionics thing, so that it can be used here too. And so that brings us to introverted feeling. How do you all experience FI?
Asking INTJs to talk about their FI.
For me, it's kind of like a ball of chaos that will try to get me to go in a direction, and then the other functions are responsible for making sure that direction is appropriate.
I see it as kind of like a personal standard, I guess, where it's just like almost everything that I do in life is measured against this standard. So if I make a decision, it was like, okay, do I feel good about this decision that I made? Do I think it was ethically good according to me? And very often that can get outweighed, for example, by like an NI desire or a TE, like practical outcome or something. But there's always going to be this cross-referencing back to it. And unlike ENTJs, I find that like INTJs are a little bit more prone to feeling bad about doing something if they went against their FI. And I think that can be an issue for INTJs to find the healthy balance between those two things.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. Like, I'm glad it's where it's at in my personality. Like, I'm happy that it's there, because you can suppress it as needed to get outcomes. But I just think it's stubborn. Like, I can't think of any other word besides stubborn than that. I don't think it needs, for me, it doesn't need a longer explanation than just needlessly stubborn sometimes.
Yeah, I think for me, it's I can be over idealistic. I can kind of be hell bent on one idea or one philosophy, and I don't really take account other people's opinions or emotions. I think that's kind of like an FE trickster, FE blind sort of thing. And it can also be, I think, you're in action, really, like you just feel so terrible about yourself. You have like the low self-esteem, like when I was younger and stuff like that. Or you could just kind of feel good and elated. And I think that's kind of like, we're really flat because we don't have that FE at all. That's kind of like we're just very blank faced, and a lot of people are trying to figure us out and see what makes us tick, but our emotions are very internal and we don't really like to bring them out into the world in any way.
Yeah, you wear your emotional cards close to your chest.
Yeah, and I think I've for me, I've gotten out of the practice of spraying my opinions all over the place all the time, but they're still there, you know. And I feel like we tend to get better at, I mean, a sense of the felt, a sense of the feelings of others, the felt judgments of others doesn't come naturally to us at all. But I think with practice and with experience and with just being, you know, just to sort of always having an eye on tracking that and asking, like, are you like, where are you with this? Are you okay with this? Is this too much for me? Or, you know, all of these things. It's not something that comes that's naturally on my radar, but I think I've gotten better at sort of at least asking, and tracking that in more of a thinker-ish kind of way, the sort of extroverted feeling. But introverted feeling, yeah, no, I'm not. I always know how I feel about something. It's not, you know, there isn't much that it doesn't really sneak up on me, but it can take hold if that feeling is very strong. And then I need to make some effort to control it.
Are you guys able to pinpoint your emotions, like use an adjective to name your emotions? I know that I feel them, but sometimes I struggle to kind of name exactly what it is.
No.
Yeah, I have a general sense of what it is, but in terms of, I feel like that's just introverted feeling. Dominant types are great at all of these very, you know, precise kind of gradations of emotion, you know. And no, it's sort of a swamp, but you know.
I think I could put it into like a general category of what I'm feeling. Maybe not give like an exact pinpoint detail, but that's also because I'm not really concerned about what it's called, because like I'm feeling it, like, right. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time trying to label it. I'd rather discuss the, you know, the TE like outcomes of that feeling. What does it mean that I had this feeling? How is that going to impact me in my life? I always describe me kind of feeling things as almost like me being in third person, watching myself feel something and then trying to like see how that, you know, manifests itself. I very rarely feel like I'm actually feeling something myself, with the occasional outlier of like stress or frustration, which tends to be a little bit more immediate. But I think that's the more rare case.
Yeah, the NI detachment. Interesting.
I do have a very hard time expressing it to others. I'll add that.
What's your guys' like default emotion? For me, I'm just kind of like neutral or calm. A lot of people just assume I'm upset, but I just kind of don't really feel anything. I'm just kind of in the middle. I mean,
the word friends and family have used throughout my life is specifically Zen is the word that they use. I have a very calm, flat affect 99% of the time. Yeah, I do have kind of like the resting, you know, B-word face. I'm not going to curse on your channel, Joyce. So I think people misinterpret how I'm actually feeling versus what they think I'm feeling. So they'll come up to me being like, hey, are you okay? Are you doing all right? And it's like, yeah, I'm fine. Just, you know, my affect is very flat.
I can completely agree with AsuraPsych on this. I think INTJs are really ineffective at presenting to other people what their emotions are. Because like I think nearly all of my life people like misinterpreted what I was feeling, and like they'll be like, they might think I'm grumpy or sad, and I'm usually not either. yeah, and I think it's just like not very good at expressing it.
Looks can be deceiving, for sure. And so that brings us to extroverted sensing. How is everyone's experience of that?
Fun one, I guess. Looking foolish, kind of giving people a bad experience, sounding bad, I guess. It kind of keeps you in your introverted bubble where you don't want to move out. I think it's really important to exercise it and kind of develop it. I do it through martial arts. I do judo. I was very terrible at it at the beginning, but I've come pretty proficient at it, and it definitely I think once you start learning different activities and physical things and you try new things, you can kind of see how they're related with your NI, and like, oh, okay, and you're able to pick up things really quick. Like I started doing acro yoga, and I could kind of see the similarities with judo, and I took a few tango lessons, and I could kind of see the similarities there, and it just kind of builds upon it. And the more things you try, the more proficient you kind of do. INTJs are often kind of seen like we can kind of learn it, any kind of skill, and we can learn it pretty quick, but we kind of get over that fear of doing it.
I think I've noticed like two categories of low SE INTJs working with people in coaching so much. And there's like the first category, which is the one that we stereotypically think of, which is kind of like this like awkward or clumsy INTJ, where they're like not paying a lot of attention to the SE, you know, they're losing stuff, tripping over stuff, that sort of thing. But then I also kind of almost see like an anxious, preoccupied version of that, where it's like they're so aware that they're bad at it, that they're not bad at it because they're like stressing about it. So it's like they go out of their way not to look clumsy, not to look silly. And I would put myself in that camp where it's like I'm stressing about it when I go out places where it's like, okay, I need to make sure I'm not going to trip over my shoes or not run into things and pay attention. So yeah, that's just my observation though.
I would say that the way I use it is to unlock NI, like whatever power NI has. It's a weird thing. Like if you focus on having an insight, you won't have it. But like as soon as you do something like literally shower thoughts or like washing the dishes, like all of a sudden that activity that you're just doing, that flow state you get in with SE will unlock something. So you have to use it to, you have to have SE activities that are so immersive that other things are allowed to process in the background. That's the only way it works well. But like Jeff was saying, like I was an athlete in high school, and I think a lot of INTJs get they have a like a secret skill. I know Gabriel's like a fencer, sword fighter or something. So there's like activities we do that like might be weird, or like, yeah, there you go, that SE wants to satisfy. So it's kind of funny what the INTJ SE skill ends up being.
I think getting in front of a camera is a pretty big SE thing too. I mean, you're kind of giving this, like Chris said, that he can just kind of do this video off the fly. I can't really do that yet. That's for sure. A lot of ums and uhs and pause and cussing when I mess up and retakes and stuff like that is a big thing for me.
I do a lot of retakes though. So I'm not just doing like one take and being done with it.
I do feel like the SE is it always feels like being at least one step removed from reality, whatever the present situation is. There's always there's a different filter or a different screen that things are going through first, which is why when things are very hectic and there's a lot going on, there's strategies around this, but I used to fall into getting extremely overwhelmed by those kinds of situations. And there's the more demonic aspect of it, where it's calling out to you to overindulge, which I do have experience with. But again, there's you grow up and get things on the right track, hopefully. So yeah, but yeah, the feeling of just sort of being a step or two or three removed from reality. I'm sort of, to be honest, feeling that today, just because this is a extremely hectic month, much more hectic than usual. There's a lot more that's just in front of me that I'm working on, and those things are just sort of, it's almost like you feel you feel the intuition working and you know that there's too much right now, things aren't sorted out, you feel distracted, and then it's just, you just fall back into just that sort of neutral front facing, just kind of, okay, let's just, all of this is happening, but just even as a protective measure, like I just need to sort of sit back a little bit and, not let any one thing just sort of take hold, like sweep me away,
Yeah. Speaking of one step removed from reality, what is everyone's relationship with their body?
I have some interesting insight in this because this is something that I've been working with recently. I'm terrible at it. Like I'm absolutely awful at upkeeping my body, like teeth brushing, general hygiene. It's a struggle. I'm not gonna lie. Like it's like I forget to get into these routines and stuff. And something that has helped me, as I found, outsourcing it. So I spent a couple $100 on a nice Fitbit, and this thing reminds me to do things. It measures my heart rate. It tells me my activity level. It measures my sleep. And it's like, great, I can just open it up in the morning or at night and see how terrible or great I'm doing. And, when I bought this thing, it was like, your sleep is in the bottom 5% of all sleepers. Like, you're not sleeping enough. You're not doing well. You got to figure something out. And I think as an INTJ, there's no shame in realizing that you might need to get some help with that. And we live in a modern world where that's possible. And like outsourcing that to something or someone that can help you. I used to have my wife remind me, be like, hey, don't forget, do this thing, do that thing, take care of yourself.
I think it's very easy for me to ignore or injure myself without knowing it. Or like even getting to situations knowing I'm probably going to get injured, but I don't actually care because I know that the repercussions are like not lethal and I can just ignore like physical injury. That's fine. So it's kind of like a just kind of resistance to physical things in general, but obviously that backfires. So.
I think it's really a big SI demon thing down in the shadow. I think you just look at it with a different lens. Yeah, like I said, like I'll do something and I'll cut myself. Like I was helping my ESFP-X move a bed and I had a big old cut in my leg. Like, what happened? Like, oh, I guess I cut myself. I didn't even realize it. I think that's what like judo has been for me because it's all about like you're just kind of like dancing, your grip fighting, and you kind of feel your body sensations. And if you jerk or move a wrong way, they can feel it, and you kind of feel each other that way. And it kind of makes you more aware of your body. A lot of places, especially like traumatized people, they use like equine therapy where they'll like groom a horse or walk a horse. And when a horse gets startled, they can feel that horse getting startled, and they struggle feeling those sensations themselves. And that kind of helps them feel it and kind of become alert of their own body and regulate their emotions and a lot of things like that.
And Joe?
I think I'm pretty good at it. I mean, I think I make an effort to work out 3 or 4 times a week. I eat like a pretty strict keto diet. Didn't used to, but I try to stay aesthetic as possible.
And I know I always come on here and go on some rant or another about technology, but I have to admit that I agree 100% with Chris in terms of the measurement. I also have my device here and I know there's a certain, there's one way to look at it is that, yeah, we turn ourselves into robots and all of this kind of, there's plenty to be said about that. But the other way to look at it is, I know there's a certain base level of movement, exercise, sleep, etc., that I need in order to not completely fall apart. So if I can keep my sleep bank at a solid 7 hours, 10,000 steps a day, a certain like hit the exercise numbers, like I just set that as a bare minimum. And if I'm not hitting that, then I know that I've got a reckoning. I'm gonna have to reckon with that. So to keep it that just at least at the base level and to know what that is, yeah, I do the exact same thing.
I think the low S types are very prone to thinking that they can just willpower through their bodily needs. And like, yeah, that works for a while, but then you turn 30, you turn 40, and it's like, oh, okay, this is catching up with me. And I'm going to shorten my life by 20 years if I don't start taking care of these things. And so that's why I think it's important to try and catch on to that as early as possible. And, baby steps. Like, you're not trying to become the best sleeper in the world. You're just trying to make sure you're getting 6 hours a night instead of 2. Like,
yeah. It's like mind over matter until you can't. Cool. And so thank you everyone for coming out. It was nice to talk with you all male INTJ YouTubers. And as a fellow YouTuber, I feel a sense of solidarity and camaraderie with y'all. And it's nice to see the different flavors and to have the range of content that you all provide. And so, Joe, it's been really cool getting to know you, and it's nice how we're both helping the APTI spread awareness of how it exists. And so we're the new guards showing awareness of the old guards. And so the two type communities aren't divided and polarized, but they're together and united. So thank you for being on a part of that mission together. Yeah, and go check out his channel. It's Ghost of Jung.
Thank you, Joyce.
Of course. And AsuraPsych. you're like, oh, okay, me now. Yeah, it's really rad how you can just do a one take. Oh, not necessarily one take, but you can do unscripted videos, which is an extreme feat. So congrats on your mastery of TE and being able to articulate clearly.
We record the same segment 4 or 5 times, delete the bad ones, you're good to go. It's kind of like scripting, you're just doing it in real time.
Very efficient of you. And I'm one of Chris's Patreon supporters because he has awesome work. And so go check him out at AsuraPsych. And then Michael, yay. We're part of the same personality hacker cohort together. And every time I compliment Michael, he does like, he gets more and more uncomfortable. And that's the bread and butter of my existence. So yeah, thanks for being the first INTJ to be on my channel. You are one of the founding members of Type Talks. So yeah, check out Countertype, everyone. Michael likes to talk about Jung. That's his boy.
Not my boy. That's why it's been difficult to keep that series going. But yeah, interesting fellow.
And Gabriel, you have a rad system coming up, and you're going to incorporate these new elements into type. There are little tidbits that you throw out there, such as the movable and solid and the subtypes that you're introducing. So I'm excited to see your book on that, Gabriel. And go check him out at Rational Typology. And then Jeff, it's nice to see you new on the scene. So we're looking forward to getting to know you. You talked earlier about community, and so perhaps we can be your community, and you can branch out from there too. So we're here for you, INTJ Equation. Go check them out. So thank you everyone for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.